Freedom should feel like the sun on your skin, the wind in your hair, the sound of laughter in the air. For us, it was silence, the kind of silence that follows a storm, heavy with the weight of what we had lost. As we set foot in what remained of Fenwood, silence settled over the group. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of charred wood, and the once bustling village square was a desolate expanse of ruins. Ina stood at the center, her eyes scanning the destruction, with a look that was neither grief nor despair. It was determination. "This is where it begins," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. She turned to the group of survivors, villagers, former captives, and soldiers who had once served the very men who destroyed this place. The tension between us was palpable, but Ina's presence held it together like a fragile thread. "We rebuild," she continued, "not just the village but ourselves, and we do it together." Her words hung in the air, and slowly, heads began to nod. Even the soldiers who had fought against us seemed drawn to her resolve. That night, as we gathered around a fire, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Ina," I asked, my voice low but insistent, "how did you do it? How did you make them turn on each other?" Ina's gaze softened, and for a moment she hesitated. Then she sighed and began to speak. "It wasn't one plan," she said. "It was many. And it wasn't just me, it was all of us, even if you didn't realize it." She glanced around the circle, her eyes meeting each of ours. "Do you remember Elias?" she asked. Elias had been one of the soldiers, a tall, brooding man with a constant scowl. He had been among the first to turn against their leader. "I noticed he never spoke about the war with pride," Ina said. "When I asked him about his family, he told me he had a daughter he hadn't seen in years. That's where I started. I told him about Fenwood, about how it had been a place where families thrived. I told him we weren't just prisoners, we were fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters. And I asked him if he wanted his daughter to grow up in a world where people like us didn't exist." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He started questioning orders, and when others saw him hesitate, they began to hesitate too. Ina's strategy wasn't limited to Elias. She explained how she had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of other soldiers as well. "There was Mira," she continued, a hint of a smile on her lips. "She hated the captain. I saw the way she flinched whenever he barked orders at her. So I started leaving small notes where I knew she'd find them, notes that hinted at his corruption, at how he was hoarding supplies while they starved." "Mira didn't trust anyone," Ina said, "but she trusted her own eyes. Once she believed the captain was stealing from them, it wasn't hard to get her to start talking to the others." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And then there was Callan, the youngest of them. He was barely more than a boy, scared and desperate to prove himself. I told him stories about the Fenwood Guard, about how they had been heroes once. I made him want to be a hero too. When the time came, he was the one who stole the keys and freed the first group of prisoners." "It wasn't just the soldiers," Ina said, her voice growing somber. "It was all of us. We worked together in ways they couldn't see. We spread rumors, stole food, hid weapons. We made them doubt each other until they didn't know who to trust." Her eyes flicked to me, and I saw the weight she carried, the knowledge that every step of her plan had cost someone something. "The final blow came during a storm," she said. "The captain ordered them to move the prisoners despite the weather. I knew it would be the breaking point. Mira refused outright. Elias sided with her. And when the captain raised his hand to strike her, Callan stopped him. She took a deep breath, her hands clenched in her lap. That's when it all fell apart. The soldiers turned on each other, and in the chaos we made our move." As she finished her story, the fire crackled between us, its light casting flickering shadows on her face. "It wasn't bravery," she said quietly. "It was desperation. I just didn't want us to die." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment no one spoke. Finally, one of the former soldiers, Ren, broke the silence. "You didn't just save your people," he said. "You saved us too." Ina looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. Then she nodded, her expression unreadable. "Some mornings the weight of loss feels heavier than others. The sunlight breaks through the trees, golden and warm, and for a fleeting moment it feels like everything is as it was. But then I remember, they're gone. The village was still a skeleton of what it once had been, with beams of burnt wood jutting out like the bones of a fallen giant. Yet, amidst the ruins, there was movement. People rebuilding homes, tending to the fields, and planting new seeds. Life was returning to Fenwood. But for Ina, every step forward felt like a betrayal of the past. I found her one evening, sitting alone on the remains of what had once been her family's home. The oak tree, though charred, still stood nearby, a stubborn reminder of resilience. Ina's hands rested on her knees, her fingers absently tracing patterns in the dirt. "Why here?" I asked, sitting beside her. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the tree, her eyes distant. "This is where my mother used to braid my hair," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of pain. "I can still hear her laugh sometimes," Ina continued. It was soft, like the wind through the leaves. She'd hum while she worked, and even when we didn't have much, she made it feel like we had everything. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I'd known Ina's family. Everyone in the village had. They were the kind of people who opened their doors to anyone in need, who made the world a little brighter just by being in it. "I miss her too," I said, though the words felt inadequate. Ina's gaze dropped to the ground. "It's not just her, it's my father, my sister, even the little things. The way the house smelled of stew when I came home. The way my sister used to tease me." Her voice cracked and she drew in a sharp breath. "I should have been there. Maybe if I hadn't been taken—" "No," I interrupted, my own voice firmer than I expected. "Don't do that. You couldn't have stopped it. None of us could." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Ina wasn't the only one carrying ghosts. Every survivor had lost someone. As the days went on, I began to notice how grief seemed to weave through the village like an invisible thread, binding us together, even as it threatened to pull us apart. One afternoon, as we worked to clear debris, an old man named Varric collapsed in the middle of the square. He was clutching a scrap of cloth, a piece of his wife's dress. "She made this for our anniversary," he murmured, his voice breaking. 40 years, gone in an instant. Ina was the first to reach him. She knelt beside him, her hands steady on his shoulders. "She'd want you to keep going," she said softly. "Not for her, but for the life you shared, for the love you gave her." Her words seemed to breathe strength into him. Slowly, he stood, and together, we helped him back to his feet. But while Ina could comfort others, she seemed unable to extend the same kindness to herself. I often found her wandering the outskirts of the village alone, her gaze fixed on something only she could see. One night, as the moon hung low over Fenwood, I followed her to the brook where we'd buried the stone. She was kneeling by the water, her hands cupped as if she were cradling something precious. "They would have loved to see this," she said without turning around. "The stars, the moonlight. My mother always said the world was beautiful, even when it hurt." I sat beside her, unsure of what to say. The sound of the brook filled the silence between us, a gentle reminder of the life that still flowed around us. "Do you think they're watching?" she asked suddenly. "Do you think they'd be proud of what I've done?" Her voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear her. "They'd be more than proud," I said. "They'd be amazed." She gave me a small, sad smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Rebuilding Fenwood wasn't just about fixing the houses or replanting the fields. It was about learning how to live again, how to find joy in a world that felt hollow without the people we'd lost. The soldiers who had joined us were a strange mix of guilt and gratitude. They worked harder than anyone, hauling wood and repairing roofs as if trying to atone for their past. But their presence was a constant reminder of the war that had taken so much from us. One day, as we worked to rebuild the village square, a soldier named Elias approached Ina. "I don't know how you do it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything we did, everything I did, how can you even look at me?" Ina paused, the hammer in her hand frozen mid-swing. "Because hating you won't bring them back," she said simply. "But if you help us rebuild, maybe we can create something they'd be proud of." Despite the weight of grief, there were moments of light. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the villagers gathered around a makeshift fire. Someone started singing, a soft, mournful tune that gradually swelled into a chorus. Ina sat beside me, her face illuminated by the flames. For the first time in days, I saw her smile, a real, unguarded smile. "They'd like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The music, the laughter, it feels like them." In that moment, I realized something important. Grief didn't have to be the end. It could be the beginning of something new, a way to honor those we'd lost by carrying their memory forward. And as the fire crackled and the voices rose around us, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could build a life worth living again. Love isn't something you plan for. It sneaks up on you like a gentle breeze, unbidden and unexpected, and before you know it, you're caught in its embrace. The first time Aina noticed Elias was during the roof repair of Fenwood's meeting hall. He was perched precariously on the rafters, hammering away with the precision of a craftsman, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. She had seen him before, of course, one of the former soldiers who had stayed to help rebuild, but until that moment, he had been little more than a face among many. It wasn't his appearance that caught her attention, though his striking green eyes and unruly dark hair were hard to ignore. It was the way he laughed. Deep, genuine, and infectious, it spilled across the square like sunlight breaking through the clouds. "Careful, Elias," someone called. "You'll bring the whole roof down with that racket." "I'll have you know," Elias replied, his voice carrying over the laughter below, "that this roof will stand long after we're all gone. You'll tell your grandkids about it, built by the finest craftsmen in all the lands." Aina couldn't suppress a smile. For the first time in what felt like years, she felt something light and warm bloom inside her. The first real conversation between them happened a week later, during the midsummer gathering. A hastily arranged celebration to mark the village's progress. The square was alive with music, laughter, and the faint smell of roasted venison. Aina had been standing near the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, content to observe. But then Elias appeared, a grin tugging at his lips. "You're not hiding from the fun, are you?" he asked, his tone teasing. "I'm not much of a dancer," she replied, though the truth was more complicated. She couldn't remember the last time she'd let herself enjoy something as simple as music. "Well, that's a shame," Elias said, extending a hand toward her, "because I'm told I'm quite terrible, and it would make me feel better to have some company in my failure." Before she could think of a reason to refuse, his hand closed gently around hers. He led her to the center of the square, where others were already spinning and laughing. "I warned you," she said as the music began to swell. "And I'm still here," he replied, his voice soft. Their steps were clumsy at first, filled with awkward missteps and stifled laughter. But as the music shifted into a slower, gentler melody, they found a rhythm. Aina's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, his on her waist, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded away. "You're better than you think," Elias said, his voice low. She looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his eyes. "At dancing?" "At surviving," he said simply. Their budding connection wasn't without its challenges. Aina couldn't forget who Elias had been, a soldier in the army that had destroyed her home. And Elias carried his own burdens, haunted by the choices he had made. One evening, as they sat by the brook where the Whispering Stone had been buried, Elias broke the silence. "I used to think I was fighting for something noble," he said, his gaze fixed on the water. "Honor, duty, the safety of my people, but now, all I see are the faces of the people we hurt." Aina studied him, her expression unreadable. "Then why stay here?" "Because it's the only way I know how to make it right," he said, turning to meet her eyes. "And because of you." She looked away, her heart pounding. "I'm not a savior, Elias, I'm just me. And that's enough," he said softly. The turning point came on a night when the stars seemed to burn brighter than ever. Elias had found Aina, sitting on the hill overlooking the village, a place she often went to escape the weight of her thoughts. He sat beside her, the silence between them comfortable. After a while, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving, a bird, its wings spread in flight. "I made this for you," he said, holding it out. Aina hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against his. "Why a bird?" "Because you remind me of one," he said. "Free, strong, and always moving forward, no matter how hard the wind blows." She stared at the carving, her throat tight. "I don't feel strong," she whispered. Strength isn't about never falling, Elias said. It's about getting back up. And you, Ina, have gotten up more times than anyone I've ever known. The vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into him, resting her head on his shoulder. And as the stars bore silent witness, Ina realized that maybe, just maybe, she could let herself feel something beyond grief. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Ina and the people of Fenwood rebuilt not just their village, but their lives. The scars of their past lingered, but they found ways to fill the void with laughter, hard work, and the small joys of everyday life. Ina and Elias grew closer with each passing day, their bond deepening in ways that neither had expected. Yet beneath the warmth of their growing connection, Ina felt the stirrings of something she couldn't ignore, a sense of unfinished business. One quiet evening, as the two sat beneath the stars on the hill overlooking Fenwood, Ina broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like there's something more out there?" she asked, her gaze distant. Elias tilted his head, studying her. "More? More to do, more to see, more to fix," she said, her voice soft. "I look at what we've done here and I'm proud, but I can't help thinking about all the other villages that weren't as lucky. All the people still suffering." Elias frowned. "You've done enough, Ina. You've given so much already." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "But what if I can do more?" The next morning, Ina gathered the elders and the villagers. She stood in the center of the square, her voice carrying with quiet determination. "Fenwood is strong again," she began, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "But the world beyond our borders is still broken. We know the pain of loss, the cruelty of war, and we know the power of unity. We've proven that even in the face of devastation, we can rise again." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I want to take what we've learned here and bring it to others, to help rebuild not just homes, but hope. I'm asking for volunteers, anyone willing to join me on a journey to share our story, our strength, and our resilience." The crowd murmured, and then one by one, hands began to rise. "I'm with you," Elias said, stepping forward. "So am I," said Eleanor, the village healer. Ina's heart swelled as more and more people joined them, their faces alight with the same determination she felt. In the days that followed, preparations began. Ina and her group planned to travel far and wide, offering aid to those in need and forging alliances with other villages. 2 days before their departure, Ina stood alone by the brook where the Whispering Stone had been buried. She knelt, her fingers brushing the grass, and whispered a quiet promise to her family, her village, and herself. "I'll carry your memory with me, always." When the day of the journey arrived, the villagers gathered to see them off. As Ina turned to lead the group down the winding road, she glanced back at Fenwood one last time. It was no longer the broken place she had returned to years ago. It was a symbol of resilience, of love, and of hope. And as the sun rose behind them, casting golden light over the fields, Ina knew their journey was just beginning. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing stories. Hit the bell so you never miss out. See you next time.